Métis people today. As a community, we have a responsibility to honor and respect this territory's significance for the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon it, and whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the territory and its other inhabitants today. In the spirit of reconciliation and truth, we acknowledge the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples on whose traditional territory we are meeting. Thank you for that, and ask that everyone who has a cell phone, please ensure it's off or turned to silent. We turn to item number 2, please. Ms. Lewis-Carlson.
Okay. There was an amendment to the agenda. So the recommendation is that South Huron Council approves the agenda as amended.
And is there a mover, please, for that? Moved by Councillor Oak, seconded by Councillor MacLeod-Haggett. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Mr. Neeb, go ahead, please.
8.4 Avon-Maitland District School Board meeting highlights. February 27th, 2024. The general nature, I am an employee of the Avon-Maitland District School Board. And 14.4 Dark Horse Estate Winery. The general nature, my wife is employed by one of the managers of the winery. So if those items come up, I will be stepping out.
Okay, thank you. And I have a Declaration of Interest, Municipal Conflict of Interest Act under 9.3.1, and a representative of a company who had bid on this project called me prior to it being awarded and after it had been unsealed. So I'll be removing myself, and Deputy will be in the chair at that time. Thank you. Okay, moving right along, presentation. We welcome from Hemsons, Stefan, and I don't know if I can pronounce your last name. Are you on Zoom? Nice to see you, Stefan. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Finch.
And can you just tell me how you say your last name, please?
It's Krzeczunowicz, but it's difficult even in Polish.
Okay, yeah. Very well. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to rely. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. And appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Mayor and members of council, to speak to you this evening on your user fee and revenue generation study. I'm an associate partner in Hempson Consulting and in Toronto, and we were retained to undertake this study for you. We released a report on our findings last week, and this evening I'm hoping to take about 20-25 minutes of your time to summarize those findings. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions you or council members may have about them. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to spend 1 or 2 minutes speaking about what we were retained to do and the legislation in Ontario that underpins fee setting and the authority to impose fees. The methodology for determining the right fee for the right service varies depending on the service and the context. So I'll speak a little bit about the various methodologies that we've used. The work analyzes the full cost of providing services in South Huron and identifies the fees you would need to impose to recover all of those costs or a portion of those costs, depending on the service. For some services, it's quite difficult to identify the cost of undertaking the work. And so we've relied heavily on benchmarking fees with similar and surrounding municipalities to supplement the cost recovery analysis. And I'll let you know exactly what the benchmarking exercise reveals for both the current fees that are in place and the proposed fees that are in our report. And then I'll just conclude with what the next steps are for this process. There's some public consultations that are being proposed for later this month and in April before we bring back sort of a final bylaw and fee schedules for your consideration. Next slide, please. So what are the most appropriate user fees in South Huron? And really there's 3 steps to answering that question. The first is to identify the cost of providing the services, which I mentioned earlier. You'll note that we're looking at I'll be speaking a lot about the full cost. And so we're talking both about the direct costs and the indirect costs associated with delivering services. And I'll explain what that means in a couple of slides. Step 2 then is to establish what portion of the full cost should the municipality be trying to fund through the fees. And then step 3 would be what specific fee rates and rate structures need to be put into place in order to achieve the level of cost recovery that you want to achieve. Next slide, please. We're looking at almost all of the fee-based services that are available in South Huron, and they're listed here. We're going to go through each one in a little more detail later on, but just this slide just summarizes them for you. So your building permit review process and your planning application review process is covered in Schedule A of your Bylaw 89-2021. Schedule B covers the fees that you charge for corporate services. That's going to cover your licensing fees and your special events fees. And then your financial services fees, which is really about the administration of the property tax. Schedule C covers your environmental services, which is really about water and wastewater equipment rentals and water meter maintenance, installation, and shut-off services. Schedule D is your community services fees. So that's your rec programs, community hall rentals, pool and arena usage fees, and fees for usage of the parks. Schedule E is the rentals of facility space. Schedule F covers fees that are charged by the fire department to deal with false alarm calls and for issuing sort of incident and fire inspection reports. And then Schedule G covers the use of municipal roadways and maintenance. There are fees that are, as I said, are not covered. So you see the footnote there, you'll see the fees associated with the landfill and waste management, as well as development charges are outside of what we're looking at. Next slide, please. There's 3 pieces of legislation that govern fees for this study. I'm going to start with the bottom one. So the Municipal Act is sort of the umbrella authority, and it gives the municipality quite broad-ranging powers to establish fees for services or activities, costs that you incur for services or activities, and the use of your property. And you can impose the fees to cover administration and enforcement costs, capital costs, as well as operating costs. And it'll apply whether the services are mandatory or discretionary. So it's quite broad authority. There's no right of appeal of these fees to the Ontario Land Tribunal. The planning application review process is covered under the Planning Act. And the authority is a little bit different from the Municipal Act in that you have to establish fees to ensure that you don't overcharge one type of applicant in order to subsidize the service you're providing to another type of applicant. So there's a bit more rigor involved in establishing the planning fees. It's especially important to get them right because here there is a right of appeal to the OLT on a case-by-case basis. And then finally, for your building permit review operations, the Building Code Act gives you powers to impose fees for the costs of those activities. Again, there's no right of appeal to the tribunal for these fees, but here you're required to undertake a public meeting before you make any changes to those fees. And so one of the consultations that's being proposed moving forward is to hold that public meeting. Next slide, please. I mentioned that there's various methodologies that we use to determine what the full cost of providing services are and what the appropriate fees should be. So the first one really focuses on the services that are labor intensive. And these are going to be your building and planning fees, your corporate finance fees, and water and wastewater and transportation to some extent. The majority of the costs of providing these kinds of services are the costs of staff time spent on either processing an application or delivering a service. And so figuring out the right fee means figuring out which staff spend what time on each type of service. And that process is activity-based costing. So we've spent a lot of time interviewing all the staff involved in delivering all the different services, mapping out what time is spent on what service, and assigning a portion of the associated salaries and office space costs, other operating costs, and capital costs of those activities. Those are what we refer to as direct costs. And we've also calculated a portion of indirect costs of your sort of corporate departments that are needed to support the direct cost providers. And then for the building code activities, we've also calculated a portion of the fee that would be paid into the reserve funds that you have in place to deal with revenue shortfalls when, for example, building permits are slow in 1 year and you still need to pay your staff, for example, to carry through to the following year. Sometimes, as I said, we need to rely on benchmarking because costs, it's difficult to determine exactly what the full cost of providing the service is. So, you know, here we're trying to establish the fee based on what others charge for a similar service. There are some fees that are calculated just as a sort of a flow-through cost, which is the cost of a material plus a markup for staff time or indirect costs. And then for some fees, we are trying to establish the fee, recognizing that you're not really trying to recover the full cost of the service. This is particularly comes into play when we're talking about recreation fees, where there are different priorities for the municipality. We're not trying to ensure that people who use the pool, for example, are covering the entire cost of operating the pool over the year through their pool admission fees. So there are significant subsidies that are provided to recreation users for very good reasons. You want to have a healthy community that's, you know, teaching kids to swim. You want people skating. You want people exercising. You want to be competitive with your neighboring municipalities. So there are sort of subsidies that we have established for the recreation fees that are sort of unrelated to recovering the full cost of service. Next slide, please. This just gives you an overview of where most of the revenue is being generated. So this is taken from publicly available financial information returns for the year 2022, which is the latest year we have FIR information for. But it's just to give you a snapshot of, you know, what's generating most of the fee revenue. And you can see here that the recreation services is the single biggest revenue generator at 38% of total revenue. And if we take the planning and the building code operations, that's going to be another 43%. And then the other services are less than 20%. So the biggest revenue generators are going to be your recreation, your planning, and your building code operations. But altogether, it's a significant revenue stream, about $1.23 million in 2022. Next slide, please. These are the municipalities that we've looked at for the benchmarking exercise. So they're shown in blue there and red. So it's the municipality Lambton Shores in Lambton County, Huron East, North Perth and West Perth in Perth County, Lucan Biddulph in Middlesex County, and then the town of St. Mary's as well. All of these are very similar in their patterns of growth, their physical characteristics, very rural, agricultural communities, but perhaps have experienced a bit faster growth in recent years than we've seen in recent decades. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just go through each of the services very quickly. So the planning application review process, the total cost of service for this year is estimated at $336,000. And you can see how those costs are broken down in the pie chart. About half of them are salaries, and then the remainder are other operating costs, and then about 18% are indirect costs. Overall, we think the municipality can justify increasing these fees quite substantially by 64% across the board. Remember, though, that under the Planning Act, we have to calculate fees for each type of application. And so that 64% has not been applied uniformly. For rezoning applications and consent applications, the percent increase that we've calculated is a bit lower. And for things like subdivision and site plan applications, the fee increase is very much higher than the 64%, because these are very expensive and labor-intensive activities. When we look at what other municipalities are charging, we can see that right now your site plan fees are extremely low. Your minor variance and rezoning fees are sort of within the benchmark range, and your fees for subdivisions and consents and official plan amendments are relatively high. We would ask council to consider implementing full cost recovery fees, but want to point out that most municipalities that we've benchmarked are not recovering the full cost of providing these types of services. There's a few recommendations in the report for new fees to be introduced where currently you're providing a service where a fee is not charged. And there are some new fees that have been introduced for the application process itself, especially in the site plan area. Excuse me. Next slide, please. The building code operation is costs the municipality about $727,000 currently. And we estimate that under the current fee rates, you generate around $380,000 this year. And that translates into, if you're going to implement full cost recovery fees, that translates into a 51% increase across the board to all of the fees. Included in that 51% would be a provision in each fee to ensure that your 3 reserve funds for building code operations hit 1.76 times your operating costs. Most municipalities will target anywhere between 1.0 and 2.0. So 1.76 is well within that target range. Generally, when we look at other municipalities, your current fees are in the mid-range of that benchmark, although your fees for agricultural buildings are quite low for new construction. So moving forward, it's much more common for municipalities to impose full cost recovery fees for building code activities, less so for planning, definitely more common for building code activities. So here we would recommend that council consider full cost recovery fees. And there are some new fees, as I say, we think should be introduced to cover off services that are currently being provided for free. There are also some fees that should be discontinued here because they deal with services that are no longer provided. Next slide, please. So the corporate and financial services fees represent a very small component of overall fee revenue. Generally, the fees that you currently charge are in line with the municipal benchmark range. And for things like marriage licenses, you're already recovering the full cost of service. So generally, the recommendation here is to keep the current fee structure, keep the current fee rates in place. There are opportunities under the Municipal Act to impose additional fees where you are, again, providing services for which a fee is not charged, particularly on the liquor licensing side of things and licensing for outdoor patios. Your fees for special events are quite low compared to the quite significant amount of time it takes to process permits and licenses for these activities. And there are some areas of the property tax administration services where you can impose fees for things like account setups, arrears notices, and so on and so forth. These fees are not currently indexed, and they should be, in our view, in your bylaw. And there are one or two fees which should be discontinued because they are redundant. Next slide, please. So these fees, the water, wastewater, and utility fees, these are really trying to recover the cost of water and wastewater equipment rental, as well as water meter maintenance and installation, and new water and wastewater service installation where there are existing water mains. So it's trying to encourage people to hook into the municipal systems. Like the corporate fees, this is a relatively small revenue stream, certainly compared to the rec, building, and planning. It's very difficult to benchmark these fees because there's quite a unique fee structure in South Huron. So we weren't able to glean much from looking at what other municipalities charge. The recommendations are set out here. There are some updates that need to be made to the hourly rates for staff time to reflect the full direct and indirect cost of staff time associated with this work. There should be markups introduced on materials costs to cover staff time and indirect costs. Vehicle rental fees are currently fixed hourly rentals, and they should be tied to the hourly rental rates that are prescribed by Ontario regulation. And there are one or two fees that should be increased to reflect full cost recovery, including these water shutoffs, meter checks, and frontage fees as well. And there's one or two fees that can be discontinued because of redundancy. Actually, I say one or two, there's quite a few. Yes, on the recreation side then, there's about 30 fees we're looking at. So these are for children's programming, playground rentals, pool admissions, ice rentals, community hall rentals. It's a significant revenue generator, just under $500,000 on average over the years 2018 to 2021. It went down obviously during COVID, so it's difficult to compare the COVID years. It's about $500,000 a year, we think, moving forward. Most of the revenues generated from ice rentals, but not insignificant revenue arising from the parks and outdoor sports, rentals, pool admission, and the community hall rentals. Generally, your rec fees are quite low. About 60% of these fees would be in the low end of the benchmark range. About a quarter are in the mid range, and there's a few, about 15% of the total are in the higher end of the range. We've established the new fees so that the municipality would recover about 30% of your direct operating costs. That's a little bit higher than what you've recovered over the last 4 years, which is about 23%. It's a little bit higher than the municipal benchmark average, which is 24% cost recovery, but it's lower than the municipalities in Lucan Badolf, which is at 32% cost recovery, and Huron East, which is at 38% cost recovery. In order to achieve the 30% cost recovery target, you'd need to increase the fees across the board, but not equally. So it would be about a 22% increase on the ice rentals, 10% for the hall rentals, and then a bit of a mix and match for the other services and programs. And we've really relied on staff recommendations for those fees to bring them into line. It's been difficult to do this. It's been a challenge, I should say, to establish these fees because there's not detailed information about historic usage and participation for some of the services that are provided here. There are some new fees that are being recommended for some kids programs, advertising fees in the arena in particular, and for example, overnight camping in Elliott Park. And again, these fees should be indexed to inflation to make sure that they are updated regularly to track costs. Next slide, please. So fire and emergency services, again, of a relatively low amount of revenue. These are recovering a portion of the cost of fire staff when they get involved in false alarm calls, illegal burning, controlled burns, non-residential vehicle incidents, and then there is issuing those incident reports as well. And there's not really much change, we think, to be made here. The current fees generally fall within the mid-range or low end of the benchmark range. So the recommendation in our report is to keep the current fee structure and the rates. There's a few exceptions where we feel you can increase the fees for the fire inspection reports, the complaint inspections, to $75, where they currently are, I think, around $50. Next slide, please. And then finally, transportation services, again, a fairly low revenue generator. These are fees that are levied for the use of the municipal roadways and to recover the cost of vehicle rentals, including associated staff time. Again, your current fees are either sort of within or below the benchmark range. So the recommendations are that you update your staff labor costs to ensure you're recovering the full direct and indirect costs of providing services. Similar to the utilities fees, replacing the fixed fees for vehicle and equipment rentals with hourly rental rates prescribed by that Ontario standard specification. And then there's one or two fees where you can introduce full cost recovery, where it currently doesn't reflect that, the tile drain loan inspections, and a new fee for a parking permit. And then there's one or two fees that, again, that can be discontinued because the services are not really provided anymore. And then finally, next slide, please. Just some additional recommendations that would apply to all of the services and all of the fees. We recommend that this sort of review be done every 5 years to make sure that you are keeping pace with costs. And certainly in the last few years, we've seen significant cost escalation for these kinds of services. In order to do that on an annual basis, we recommend introducing indexing provisions into the bylaw schedules to make sure that they are indexed either automatically or through council resolution. We recommend that the municipality monitor the benchmarks in other municipalities to make sure that their fees are aligned with what's being charged elsewhere. It's not at all uncommon for municipalities in Ontario to add a 10% surcharge on fees for services that are being requested or required by non-residents. And so there's an opportunity to introduce that, certainly for the transportation services and the recreation services. And then just continue to make information on fees accessible to the public via the municipal website, which is what you do already. So our next steps then are, as I say, there are 2 consultations that are scheduled. One is a sort of a public open house that would essentially where I would present a similar presentation that I've presented to you, and we'd welcome members of the community to speak about the rec fees and the other fees, the planning fees. And then on April the 2nd, we're going to schedule a public meeting, which is required under the Building Code Act to deal with the building permit review fees. And that would give us an opportunity to incorporate any feedback received at those consultations into final recommendations for your consideration and passage of new fee bylaws and schedules on April the 29th. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you or members of council may have.
Great presentation, Stefan. We appreciate your time on this. Any questions from members? Oh, Ms. Masu-Carlson, please.
Through the mayor, I would clarify though that, excuse me, the April 29th meeting will be a committee of the whole, not the regular meeting. Okay.
And thank you for that clarification. Any questions from members of council, please? Councilor McLeod-Hagan, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just wondering why Blue Water was not one of the benchmark municipalities, as they're one of our neighboring municipalities that we deal with daily.
Stefan, comments, please.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure that I can give you a definitive answer on that. I know that right at the beginning of this process, we sat down with senior staff at the municipality and sort of tried to map out exactly what the most appropriate comparatives would be. And I can't remember why that specific municipality wasn't on the list. But we certainly, it wasn't an arbitrary decision to choose the municipalities that we did.
Okay, thank you. Follow up?
Rebecca, do you have?
Ms. Masu-Carlson, comments?
Through the mayor, as part of our final presentation with recommendations to council, we'll be looking at multiple things, including the public consultations, as well as looking around us to see prior to recommending to council. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Oak.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And thanks, Stefan, for the presentation. I've got a few concerns about the study that was done, but the couple of the major ones that I was wondering about is the use of the 4 and 5 year averages, depending on whether it was recreation or planning or whatever. I think to use those kind of averages after going through COVID for a couple of years where there was no usage of our facilities for a period of time doesn't give the right estimation of the use in historical. And then also on the planning and building side of things, I think we just come off of some of the, while it was the record lowest interest rate period of time that we've ever had, and to use those averages as far as the building numbers, I think is skewing things as well for historical down the road. But so those are a couple things on the averages. To Councillor McLeod Haggett's point, I think we're missing the boat on Blue Water and North Middlesex not being included. When usage of our facilities as far as arenas are considered by users, Hensel and Zurich and Park Hill arenas are definitely looked at, and I know today Blue Water, their ice numbers are lower than what we are, and it's not in that average. So so us looking to move our rates up even higher, could be jeopardizing our use of our facilities down the road. So I just would caution not utilizing those two municipalities. And then I guess the last comment I had was on the 10% surcharge. I have family members that where this is being done up in the Owen Sound area, and it's a mess with the neighboring municipalities getting charged 10% extra for their users of the facilities, and it's just a mess driving everybody to other centers, and I just don't think we want to get into that sort of scenario. So that would be my recommendation on that. And I know we'll be looking for feedback from the public, and but those are some of my few comments. I've got a few more, but I'll limit right now.
Stephanie, response?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and sorry, I've been scribbling furiously because those are all great comments. If I could just comment on the assumptions about usage and application activity. I entirely agree with the councillor. It's extremely important to parse the historical data very carefully. Although we've looked at the averages, they don't necessarily determine the revenue forecasts that we've established. So if you look at, for example, the building permit fee revenue history, it's quite volatile. It fluctuates significantly from one year to the next. And the projection moving forward does anticipate a little bit more activity than what we've seen in recent years. The planning application activity is much more stable. And so there we have relied a little bit more on historical averages. And it's more stable, I think, because it's more immune to sort of the construction cycles and decisions about when somebody's actually going to go and dig a hole in the ground. But we have sort of recognized that historical stability by using the averages. On the recreation side, we've been very cognizant about the impact of COVID. And so when we look at the historical data, we've generally excluded the COVID years. And you'll notice in my presentation, I only referred to the 2018 to 2021 years when looking at, I think it was cost recovery. We have looked very carefully too at how the usage of the facilities and the programs has recovered from COVID. And it's clear that in some areas, we're not quite back to where we were. So there are some assumptions baked into the analysis about when and how quickly we're going to get back up to the kind of usage we saw pre-COVID. But we've certainly anticipated that that's, if it's not going to occur, it's certainly something the municipality is planning to achieve moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. Follow up, Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thank you for the follow-up. One other question I had was just you mentioned establish a more formal tracking system for usage and participation. And I just wondered what that comment or what that pertains to, because I know we just did a couple large arena projects where we have significant information on usage and participation levels, and so I just wondered if that was geared to the recreation comment on a tracking, because we definitely do have, and there's one, South Huron Minor Hockey is our major user for the ice rentals. So we definitely have a good indication of probably who uses 75% of the ice out there. So just wondering what that comment was geared to.
Stefan?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. And certainly I agree for some of the major revenue generators on the rec side, there is very good historical usage data. But for some of the perhaps less used services and fees, we don't have the sort of clear chain of history than we did for perhaps the ice usage. And also it's been a challenge really to try and track how and when and for what reason participation changed during the COVID year. So that kind of has skewed things a little. So we do think that although there may well be good information for certain services, we don't have the comprehensive data that we do have for some of the other services, and we think that moving forward, it would help when this exercise was redone in a few years to have some better tracking there.
Thanks, Stefan. Councillor Neeb, you had a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Finch, and thank you, Stefan, for the report. One of the things you brought up was the idea of full cost recovery for planning and building departments, and that currently we're not actually doing full cost recovery. And I'm just wondering, and I'm not sure if this is a question for Stefan or if this is a question for staff, but as to why exactly that is. And I know we've had discussions in the past about development paying for development. However, there's also, I think we need to be cognizant too of remaining competitive with other municipalities, but I'm kind of curious as to why it seems inconsistent across other municipalities and specifically for us.
Stefan, do you want to take that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So I think I think I mentioned in my presentation that it's much more common for municipalities to have full cost recovery building permit fees, and the part of the reason is that those fees are at the end of the development process when someone is ready to proceed, and there's a clear link between the service that's being provided to the individual and the cost of the service that's involved. So it's a plans review, it's an inspection on a site, it's fairly self-contained and easy to calculate, and builders will sort of build it into the cost of just doing business. So there's a long sort of tradition of charging those fees for those reasons. Many municipalities that set their own fees look at the costs of the building department in isolation and pay less attention to the indirect costs. Also, a lot of municipalities don't have reserve funds to cope with revenue shortfalls from one year to the next, and so property tax revenue is often used to supplement when there isn't enough fee activity. And as I said, we've made provision to ensure that doesn't happen. So we've taken a shall we say, a fairly rigorous approach to full cost recovery here. Entirely defensible, but certainly this is perhaps something that a lot of municipalities in this part of Ontario haven't really adopted. On the planning side, it's far less common to implement full cost recovery because, you know, historically, municipalities didn't want to charge people who were, you know, exploring development opportunities very early in the planning process. And I think that there, you know, with the pressure on trying to keep property taxes low, there's been a bit of a change of thinking in this area. So certainly in the GTA, full cost recovery planning fees are becoming the norm. It's just less common outside the really fast growing areas of the province, but it is slowly turning in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Follow up?
No, thank you for that. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Vaughn.
Yes, we have between these reports that we've received on this subject, we have a community engagement period that's referenced to start March 5 and run to April 15th. And so March 5 is like tomorrow. And I had rightly or wrongly rather envisioned that when council received this fee package, that we would have some time to digest what was in this package. So I have questions, but I'm more trying to figure out how this is actually going to work. So if we have a public engagement period that sort of kicks off after like tonight, and we're introducing what we might think we're going to increase fees in different areas, and council's not meeting until April 29th, I think it is, to actually be able to take, maybe, I'm hoping, a deeper dive. If we decide that there are some things that we do want to happen or don't want to happen, but it's already been communicated to the public and created the impression that it is going to happen, how we actually remedy that. So I guess I'm trying to set in my mind, how is this community engagement piece going to work alongside of council having an opportunity at some later point in time to provide some more fulsome input.
Ms. Carlson, do you want to take that, or Stefan or Kate? Hi, Kate. How are you? Didn't see you there. Do you want to take that, Kate?
Certainly, through the chair. Thank you for your question, Councillor Vaughn. The idea behind the study is to understand fully what the costs are in providing a service. And the intent between the presentation tonight to council is to provide that data and those findings, which Hemson gathered over the last several months. With the community engagement period, what we're looking to do is say to the public, this is what it's costing the municipality to provide the services which you may or may not participate in as a property tax payer and resident of the municipality, and understand that there is a property tax component, there's a user fee component, and then as part of revenue, there's also a grant component. So giving the public the full transparency of this is what it costs to provide services. How do you feel about this? And then giving council the opportunity through this engagement period to review in finer detail and have staff come back with more recommendations as to, okay, the community has said that they are not in favor of increasing fees by more than 5%, that kind of a thing. So while Hemson has provided their recommendations based on full cost recovery, that's not necessarily the recommendations that staff will be coming back with after having received the engagement from the community.
Thanks, Kate. Follow up, Councillor Vaughn.
Yes, I do have a follow-up, Kate. So the public is going to be finding out what the actual costs for these services are, but we're also going to be presenting to them at the same time a proposed recovery revenue that we're thinking about charging. Is that correct?
It's the recommended chargeback based on what what Hempson's consulting firm has found in their data. It's not necessarily the rates that will be proposed and recommended by staff. And a lot of that consideration from the community engagement will inform the staff recommendations to council at a later date.
Okay, so I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive now in some of the things that I thought might be problematic. And this is not limited to just these items, but it's kind of what I'm seeing over the weekend while I've had time to digest this. So I cannot locate it right at this point in time, but Port Blake is one area that it looked as though the rates that we were thinking about going forward really weren't changing substantially, at least not from an increase perspective going forward. And somewhere in all these reports, it also happened to mention that there really weren't good benchmarking examples to kind of look at to compare Port Blake to something else. So we really hadn't changed anything. And to my thinking on that particular park, we have a number of different neighborhood things that are going on. Like we have the Pinery, okay, say picnic and leisure spot, which is a huge park. It also happens to have a beach, which people may or may not use. We have Rock Glen Conservation Authority. That's another one. We also have the entire town of Grand Bend that has a lot of leisure activity and parking, which is far more expensive than anything we've been charging at Port Blake. Also, too, just taking Port Blake a little step further, while we've not made decisions at council on this, we have had limited conversations about potentially not charging people outside of South Huron a 10% premium for using it, but potentially not charging South Huron residents anything for using it because they've been paying for this park through their tax base so far. And I don't see any of those sort of ideas. So that I'm not looking for the answer right now. I'm just saying these are things that I'm thinking council might want to discuss a little bit further before setting an expectation in the public mind. There was another one that I was thinking of. Okay, it's just totally gone away while I was talking on Port Blake. Oh yes, sponsorships. When we built the arenas, we also had discussion amongst council about taking a good look at sponsorship. Sponsorship from maybe we would have sponsorships for our washrooms, for our hall, maybe for the arena itself, maybe for the entire complex, maybe for things beyond just, I think it was the tennis court and soccer field in this. Anyway, it was an opportunity for people to, within the community, to take advantage of advertising opportunities. And it was an opportunity for us to take a chance or look at revenue. So I didn't really see as much of that revenue opportunity that I had hoped for in this. So I'll go kind of back to my original question. If we go out to the public tomorrow and we give an indication of what we're thinking on revenue, when we really haven't had an opportunity as a council to talk about that, are we not putting ourselves in an awkward position to bring it up on April 29th?
Mr. Sewell Colson, go ahead, please.
Now, this was the process we chose because we wanted to be as open and transparent right at the beginning with just the raw data. So that was basically what the cost recovery is. And then, as Kate had mentioned, to get the feedback from the public, the 29th, April 29th was the date for the committee of the whole, and that's why we chose it that way. Because we thought, well, at that point, council would have all the information. You would have all the time to take a look at the information that was there. You would have the public input, and you'll also have the staff recommendations. And that's the point where we'll be noting, yes, we are looking at sponsorships, not necessarily part of this, but there are those, the Port Blake, maybe the recommendations have come out. But yes, the discussions for that. And that was the point at April 29th where we were looking at providing council the staff recommendations. At this point, we thought it was kind of early to provide any kind of recommendations. It's basically the consultant's findings.
Thank you. Councillor Need, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Finch. I think that this process is well thought out. I think giving the public some time to review it and also keeping in mind that things may change. I do think, though, that we do need to be competitive with our user fees with other municipalities. I think it's important that we keep up with inflation and contemplate at least more cost recovery in some of our departments to ease the burden on our taxpayers. But I also think we need to be cognizant that any increases in fees need to be equitable as well. So I'm looking forward to having a further discussion on it and hearing from the public as to what their concerns are. But I think we do need to review some of these fees. It seems in some areas woefully unbalanced, and I think we owe the taxpayers at least looking at it and getting a handle on it a little bit more.
Great, thank you. Councillor Oak, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with Councillor Need that the indexing probably is a good thing to add into what we're doing because things continue to go up as we go. Just a question, when we talk about cost recovery, the table 25 in the actual proposal, so just so I understand it, in my thinking is, so to Councillor Vaughn's comment, so in Port Blake, for example, the current fee is saying $5, proposed is $10, and for per person car load $12 to $30, and season pass 50 to 120. Now those proposed fees, for example, is that so? Am I understanding it right that is being considered cost recovery on those proposed fees?
Stefan, do you want to take that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So no, the recreation service, as I indicated, is a little bit different because there are so many other factors at play when establishing fees. So we haven't taken the approach of identifying what the full cost recovery fee would be for the rec fees. We have established a cost recovery target for the municipality, that 30% of direct operating costs, which is a little bit higher than what you have sort of achieved historically, but it's not full cost recovery. But just for reference, because this has come up a couple of times, so this is on page 63 of your report. As the councillor mentioned, it's table 25, and there are 3 fees for Port Blake that are being proposed to increase, proposed to double or more. And there are also, in that table, sort of down at the bottom, there are also fees that have been sort of identified for advertising and sponsorship as well. So just for reference purposes.
Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, sorry, when I say cost recovery, I agree. It was the target of 30% number. So anyways, and then, yeah, the question of the same was advertising down below. So, okay, thank you.
Any other questions this time from members of council? Okay, not seeing any. Okay. Thank you very much, Stefan. Great presentation. Thank you very much, Kate, again, for helping out. And there's nothing further. We appreciate your time tonight. Ms. Masula
Thank you.
Carlson.
Okay. The South Huron Council receives the staff memo, Fin Memo 03-2024 for information. And the South Huron Council receives a presentation from Hemson regarding user fee review and revenue generation study data analysis as presented by Stefan Krasenowitz. Sorry, Stefan.
And is there a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Dietrich. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor. That carries with 7. Thank you. On to 5, there's no delegations. 6, no public meetings. 7.1, Ms. Masula Carlson, please.
That South Huron Council adopts the minutes of the regular council meeting of February 20th, 2024 as printed and circulated.
A mover, please. Moved by Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Oak. Any discussion? Councillor McLeod Hager, please.
Through you, Mayor Finch. I'm looking for clarification more on just learning the process here. So item 13, where you, during open conversation, comments and announcements, it says here, he has also provided council with an update on a recent meeting with the OPP regarding the Community Services Office and advise a letter would be brought back to a future meeting for council consideration. I'm just wondering, is that you're bringing a motion to write your own letter, or is council being directed, or sorry, staff being directed to write a letter?
No, at this point, I've got some information prepared, and I'll be bringing it up under mayor's comments for follow-up as to where I'm at with that right now. So there's no letter, staff's not preparing a letter. I'm preparing a review of what my findings are. That helps. Okay. Any other questions at all? Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder. If there's nothing further, call the question, all in favor. That carries a 7. Thank you. 8, please.
That the agenda packages, minutes, and highlights of the following committees and or boards be received as presented to council. Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, draft minutes of January 30th, 2024, and agenda package of February 27th, 2024. Dashwood Community Development Fund Committee, draft minutes of February 13th, 2024. Blue Water Recycling Association, meeting highlights of February 15th, 2024. And Avon Maitland District School Board, meeting highlights of February 27th, 2024.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Oak, second by Deputy Mayor. Any discussion? Councillor Oak.
Thank you, Mayor. Just item of interest that was in the BRA report. There was an article on where to recycle. There's a map. And so I went into the website for that, the where to recycle the map, and typed in Exeter, and it came up with a number of businesses in South Huron because it allows you to put a kilometer range. And there was a number of South Huron businesses where you could bring back different products to recycle. And I was just wondering if that's something that we could promote on social media or on our website. It was, where you could bring back tires, or there was electronics, or even lighting sort of thing. There was businesses, and you can expand it to 20 or 30 or 50 kilometer radius. So anyways, I'm just thinking it's a good thing if we can recycle more of this other items, it's just going to help our landfill overall. So,
Ms. Masula Carlson.
Through the mayor, yes, certainly we can do that.
Great. Any other comments, questions? Okay, not seeing any. We have a mover and a seconder. If there's no further discussion, call the question, all in favor. And that carries with 6. Thank you. And wait for Mr. Neeb to get back. On to 8.5.
That South Huron Council receives the draft minutes of February 13th, 2024, and the January report as presented. And that South Huron Council accept the recommendations of the South Huron Police Services Board as follows. South Huron Police Service Board proceed with the 2 community safety and wellbeing initiatives presented and are within the budgeted amount earmarked in this community safety and wellbeing line item of the 2024 Police Services Board administrative budget. And that Chair Jim Dietrich register for the OAPSB Spring Conference and AGM scheduled for June 3rd to 5th, 2024 at Blue Mountain Resort. I will add that the attachment for the budgeted amount is uploaded as additional document to the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Do we have a mover, please? Counselor Neeb, seconded by Counselor Vaughn. Any discussion? Call a question, all in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you. 9, please.
Okay. This is that South Huron Council receives a report from Selena Whaling Ray, planner, removal of holding symbol application Z02 2024.
And a mover, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Counselor Oak. Any discussion? Call a question, all in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you. 9.1.2, I think Mr. Rolfe is going to maybe do a presentation in a moment here. Mr. Carlson.
That South Huron Council receives a report of Mike Rolfe, Director of Building and Planning Services, Chief Building Official, and Vanessa Colbert, Planning Coordinator, Huron County's Population and Housing Projection Study for information.
And a mover, please. Counselor Neeb, seconded by Counselor Dietrich. And welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Through you, Mayor Finch. Through this population and housing projection study, it does indicate, as it indicates in our report, Vanessa's and mine, that South Huron looks like it's going to be growing for the next till 2051. So it's really good news. So the report kind of just very high level covers off South Huron's portion of the study. The study was done by Watson's for the entire county, right? But the report just is focused on the South Huron aspect of it. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Mr. Neeb, go ahead, please.
Yep, thank you, Mayor Finch, and thank you, Mr. Rolfe, for the report on the housing projections. It's great to see that these numbers have been updated since the original presentation to the Economic Development Board in 2023. So there's considerable growth on the horizon between now and 2051, which I think is extremely positive for the municipality. The one question I had, and I'm not sure if this is for you or for Mr. Giberson, but it was about servicing and whether we have enough water and wastewater capacity for the anticipated growth that we're projected to see.
Mr. Rolfe.
Through the chair. Yeah, I can speak to a very high level. As everybody knows, it's not my department. However, through conversations with General Manager of Infrastructure and Development, we've discussed this in quite a bit. But anyways, so through the water wastewater master plan that council is aware that will be coming forward, that is going to address a lot of the capacity issues. Council did receive a report just recently regarding our water distribution. We have a lot of water. We have unlimited basically water. It's coming from the lake. So really no concerns there. And then as well, and it's very timely, our manager of environmental services is doing our annual report for the wastewater servicing. And within the Exeter wastewater treatment facility, as well as the Grand Bend wastewater treatment facility, we have lots of capacity.
Awesome. Great news. Thank you. Any other questions? Deputy, go ahead.
Just a comment. This is not only good news for South Huron, this is good news for our county, because that's a nice chunk of our tax dollars goes there too. So if the population jumps in Huron County, it's helping everyone. So thank you.
Yep, totally agree. Any other comments? Councillor Oak.
Yeah, just and thanks Mike and Vanessa for the report. Just to follow up with Councillor Neeb's comments there, I believe it was 50%. We're only at 50% on the water as of the last report, the last council meeting, and tonight's report says that we're at around 50% for our wastewater as well. So yeah, so that's good news that we have significant capacity available for this, which is it's good news.
Yeah, great. Lots of visionary decisions made back years ago as we've talked about in the past in the council. Any other questions at all? Great presentation, or great discussion, Mike. Thank you very much for your time. If there's nothing further, we have a mover and a seconder. Call the question, all in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you, everyone. And we're on to 9.2, 9.3.1, and I'll be on a conflict there. Deputy, you want to take the chair, please?
Go ahead.
That South Huron Council received the report from Shane Timmermans, Manager of Transportation Services, re-tender results for resurfacing McTaggart Line and Corbett Line, and that South Huron Council accepts the tender received from Armstrong Paving and Materials Group and authorizes the award of a contract for the resurfacing of McTaggart Line and Corbett Line in the amount of $837,250.45, including HST.
Any comments from Shane? Oh, sorry, we need a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Oak, seconded by Councillor Neeb. Okay, Councillor Oak.
Yeah, so congratulations on getting 7 tenders. That's great news. Lots of interest. Just a question. Armstrong Paving, do we have history with this company? Have we utilized them before in the municipality?
Through you, Deputy Mayor or Deputy Dietrich. They've done some small projects for us. They haven't done mainline paving for South Huron. Yeah, it's just been a few little small jobs. They did the intersection there, upgrades there last year. Other than that, they have not done any mainline paving for us in South Huron.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wondered what kind of references or experience they had, sort of thing. So
through you, Deputy Dietrich, references were checked. Nothing was out of the norm to go any further from the references that were checked.
Thank you, Shane. Any further questions? Seeing none, we have a mover and a seconder. I call the question, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
Great, and then on to 9.3.2, please.
The South Huron Council received the report from Alyssa Keller, Manager of Environmental Services, and Ange Barnes, Compliance Coordinator, read 2023 Annual Report for the South Huron Wastewater Collection System and Exeter Wastewater Treatment Facility.
And is there a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Oak, and I believe we're going to welcome Melissa to do some speaking to this. Thanks. Welcome. How are you? Oh, I think you're on mute, maybe.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Through you, Mayor Finch, I just wanted to give a brief overview on this because it is a longer document. So just go through some of the key highlights of our annual wastewater report. So a brief description, the Grand Bend area is serviced by a wastewater collection system and 2 sanitary pumping stations. It has 1 jointly owned wastewater treatment facility that is operated by Jacobs Engineering, with the administrative municipality being Lambton Shores, acting on behalf of the Grand Bend Area Joint Sewage Board. The Exeter Wastewater Treatment Facility and Collection System provides service to approximately 5,000 residents in Crediton, Centralia, Huron Park, and Exeter. The Exeter Wastewater Treatment Facility is an aerated sewage lagoon with intermittent sand filters. The Exeter Wastewater Collection System consists of sanitary sewers, force mains, and 4 pumping stations. In 2023, there was no inspection by the Ministry of the Environment. There was also no compliance issues, no effluent quality exceedances, and no ministry orders for the South Huron wastewater treatment facility. Influent flows into the South Huron treatment facility historically continue to be less than 50% of the design capacity. As well, the influent quality remains unchanged from previous years, and is within the capabilities of the wastewater treatment facility. Summary of our effluent data. The South Huron wastewater treatment facility has a design capacity of approximately 7,051 cubic meters a day of discharge, with a total annual discharge of just over 2.5 million cubic meters. In 2023, the average daily effluent was 3,284 cubic meters a day, with the warm weather effluent discharge being 456,904 cubic meters, and the cold weather being 71,856 cubic meters. The 2023 annual discharge was 528,760 cubic meters, or 21% of the total allowable discharge spread over 161 days. There is something to note with this. The total volume was impacted by the construction activities on the filter building pumping station, and this may result in additional effluent being released in 2024. Previous trends have indicated, 2023 flow data does suggest that there may be inflow and infiltration in the wastewater collection system. Available sewage treatment capacity. In March 2014, BM Ross evaluated the capacity of the South Huron treatment plant, and with a projected annual growth rate of 0.5%, that would yield over 200 years of reserve capacity at the South Huron wastewater treatment facility. A review of the 2023 effluent quality confirmed that the Exeter wastewater treatment facility met all quality parameters for the warm weather discharge. Summary of operating issues and corrective actions. The most common operating issues encountered in 2023 were high levels and control failures. The corrective action was to respond, diagnose, and conduct emergency repairs as necessary. A summary of normal repairs and emergency repairs, as well as maintenance activities. These are included on major structures, equipments, apparatuses, and mechanisms forming part of the works, and these included repairs to sewage force mains, SCADA system upgrades, and capital infrastructure projects. Sludge volumes in the lagoon cells are continuing to be monitored, and off-site removal is not anticipated at this point. Complaints and actions taken within the sanitary network. There's 16 wastewater complaints received in 2023, mostly related to private service backups, and the complaints were addressed. Only one blockage was on the municipal side of those 16. Summary of bypasses, overflows, and spills. There was 5 raw sewage bypasses from sanitary pumping stations in 2023. Huron Park Sewage Pumping Station had 4 sewage bypasses, and Snyder Crescent Sewage Pumping Station had a single bypass. There was no spills at the Exeter Wastewater Treatment Facility, and there was 1 spill at the Huron Park Sewage Pumping Station on October 5th due to the failure of the sanitary forcing just north of the pumping station. All bypasses, spills were reported with the Spills Action Center and the MECP. Efforts are continuing to be made to eliminate bypasses, overflows within the wastewater collection system, and this will continue into the 2024. And as for the federal wastewater effluent regulations, all results of good sampling have reduced our sampling to yearly or annual sampling for the acute lethality testing. And in 2023, the Exeter Wastewater Treatment Facility was in full compliance with the federal regulations.
Thanks, Alyssa. Well done. Any questions? Councillor Neeb, go ahead.
Yep, thank you, Mayor Finch, and thank you very much, Ms. Keller, for the presentation. My question was just mainly about influent flows My question earlier too about sewage capacity was just related to, in some years, there's more influent flows than other years. So for example, like 2022 to 2023, there was an increase of about 300,000 meters cubed of influent going into the lagoon. And I'm just wondering as to, it's some years it's lower, some years it's higher. And I'm just wondering if that's due to stormwater getting into the system, or what causes that discrepancy. And I know we're below our 50% capacity on average, but I'm just kind of curious as to what's causing those increases and decreases.
Ms. Keller?
Through you, Mayor Finch, we do believe those discrepancies are directly related to the inflow and infiltration in the system.
Great, thank you very much for that answer. Any other questions for Ms. Keller at this time? Okay, not seeing any. Great presentation. Thank you very much for all you do. And we have a mover and a seconder, so I'll call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 7. Terrific. Next one, 9.3.3.
That South Huron Council received the report from Melissa Keller, Manager of Environmental Services, retender results for Blackbush Line water main replacement south of Huron Street to Crediton Road. That South Huron Council adopt the tender received from Rapid Drainage Limited and authorize award of a contract for the Blackbush Line water main replacement south of Huron Street to Crediton Road in the amount of $821,699.95, including HST.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Vaughn. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you. 9.4, please.
That South Huron Council accepts the report from Scott Curry, Manager of Communications and Strategic Initiatives, Wind Turbine Special Purpose Committee for information, and that Council approve the committee terms of reference.
And a mover, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Oak. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Carries with 7. Thank you. 9.4.2.
That South Huron Council accept the report from Scott Curry, Manager of Communications and Strategic Initiatives, read 2024 Communication Program Consultation Results for information.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Oak. Any discussion? Councillor Neeb, and I think Mr. Curry's right here. You can answer these questions.
Just more of a comment. Thank you to Scott for the report. And I think it's great that there were 100 responses. And while it isn't a scientific survey, it's always great to get feedback, I think, especially about our communications. Even if it could be possibly from multiple times from the same people. But I do think we've taken great strides to ensuring our processes are transparent. And I think a really good example of that is how we record our meetings. I know it was out of necessity during COVID, but I think it's great that we have that system set up and that we upload our videos to YouTube. And I think I know that's a lot of work on staff's end to make sure that process is set up. But it's great that the public can have access to all of our proceedings. So thank you to staff for making that happen.
Any other questions? Councillor MacLeod-Haggett.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just wondering what the next steps are and how this information is going to be utilized going forward.
Mr. Curry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Councillor Haggett. Really important that we take the time to listen to our community. So we have an initial batch of feedback here. We are taking this to our senior management team, and we're going to discuss it as a group. We already see things that we can improve upon, some really great guidance here from the community. We're going to talk about it and make basically a list, and we're going to come back to council with a list of improvements that we make. And if there's anything that requires any kind of significant investment or additional budget impacts, that'll come at budget time. But at this time, it looks like these are relatively easy, not necessarily quick, but fixes that we can make to our communication program.
Follow-up, go ahead.
Sorry, just one more follow-up question then. One thing I noticed on the survey was difficulty navigating our current website. Do you have a projected date when the new set website will be up and launched?
Mr. Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Really good question as well. We're targeting June. I don't have a specific date in June at this time because it depends on other projects that are in flight at that time. So for example, the fees and charges bylaw is one example where we're going to rely on the website very heavily to inform the public and get some feedback. So we don't want to do a switcheroo that would interrupt projects that are in flight at that time, but we're aiming for June.
Thank you. Any other follow-up, Councillor McLeod? Any other questions, comments? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Curry. If we have a mover and a seconder, if there's no further discussion, call the question. All in favor? That carries with 7. Thank you. Notice of motion, Madam Clerk, are there any?
There are none.
Thank you. Items for discussion arising from the previous meetings. Anything at all? Okay, and new business, number 12. We have none under 12.1. Sorry, Councillor McLeod, go ahead, please.
I've just received some phone calls regarding the Dashwood Park and what is happening there. Just looking for a status update on has the with respect to accessibility, has there been further communication with the county coming in? Where is that sitting at?
Ms. Carlson, please.
Through the mayor. There is an accessibility site review subcommittee. The Huron County is meeting March 14th. And we'll have staff in attendance at that meeting as well.
Great. Thank you. Anything further? Okay, we go on to 12.1 then. Oh, sorry, Councillor McLeod, go ahead, please.
Sorry, through you, Mayor Finch. Just looking for an update on the updated report on the Stephen Arena with respect to the sprinkler system and its facility being able to use year round.
Ms. Carlson.
Through the mayor, there is a report in the works.
Okay, thank you. 12.1 now. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Carlson, 12.1.
That South Huron Council set council priority setting workshops for March 25th and April 8th, 2024 at 4 p.m.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Vaughn. Any discussion? Councillor Oak, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a clarification. You said April 8th, but it's April 6th. Just wanted to clarify.
Sorry, just to provide clarification, April 6th was a Saturday, so April 8th is the Monday that
Okay.
it's set for.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Thank you for that. Call the question. All in favor? That carries with 7. 12.2, please.
That South Huron Council sets a committee of the whole for April 22nd, 2024. This will be for fire services and bylaw enforcement framework discussion. And April 29th, 2024, which would be the user fee discussion at 4 o'clock p.m.
Thank you. And do we have a mover, please? Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Vaughn. Thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Vaughn.
Yes, just one question for the fire services, April 22. I also have on my calendar that that's when the Ontario Good Roads Conference is on. Is it? Yeah. And so I just didn't know if we had anybody from council who would be at the conference and therefore miss the important fire.
Ms. Carlson.
Through the mayor, I don't believe we did not receive any requests for booking. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, so there's no further discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries with 7. Thank you. Next one, 13, Mayor and Councillor comments and announcements. Any comments from members of council at this time? Not seeing any. Okay, very well. And as Councillor McLeod had mentioned earlier there, regarding the conversation or comment I made last council meeting. As I committed to the last council meeting, I asked for a meeting with OPP Commissioner Creek to discuss the document that he'd authored in July 2020. I was later advised that he did not receive my message through their chain of command for the February 23rd meeting. However, we did connect on the 28th of February through the Teams program. During our conversation, I explained the commitment made by OPP Chief Superintendent Kane on November 30th, 2018, and asked for correspondence from him to confirm his position, make him aware of tonight's meeting where I was hoping to bring it to council's attention. His correspondence did arrive, but it was past the deadline for tonight's meeting, and it is my intention to bring that and my correspondence that I'll have as a review at the next March 18th meeting. That's all I have at this time. So is there anything else for anyone else at this point? Okay, very well. On to 14. Ms. Masula Carlson.
14.1. 14.2. 14.3. 14.4. 14.5.
Full.
14.6.
Full.
14.7.
Okay, 14.4. Mr. Neve, I believe you have a disclosure there. Ms. McLeod Hague, or Council McLeod Hague, go ahead, please.
I guess I'm just looking at council to support this request, and potentially there would be funds in the safety well-being fund reserve that we could use to support that, given it's dealing with mental health.
Comments from members of council? Are you making a motion to proceed with that? A mover then? You're moving that? Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Dietrich, you want to second that? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Are you seconding that then? Okay, go ahead.
Just how much is, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, how much is that, what they're asking for? Like, what is the rental fee for an hour?
Ms. Masula Carlson? Or Councillor Oak, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I would say it's $135 at prime time ice sort of thing, or less, depending on or 138 maybe, I think it was. And then less if it's non-prime ice or whatever. So I think that's what our hourly rate is. So this is just this is mental health is one of our priority items for community safety well-being. So I think it's probably the right thing to be doing in this case. I don't want to get back into the grant business, but I think part of our community safety well-being initiative is in that light, and the funds or the ice is being used for an auction item, I believe, and the money going to the Huron Purse Center, which is a registered charity. And maybe Rebecca, could you comment on the idea of a registered charity potentially?
Ms. Masula Carlson?
Right now, council has passed a resolution for facility space for a registered charity. It would not necessarily cover the ice piece.
Okay, thank you. Deputy, go ahead.
Just a comment. I'm not sure where the budget is for the community safety and well-being. And I guess we want to make sure that there's enough money there to cover it. Thank you.
Councillor Vaughn, did you have something? Oh, okay. I thought you were going to have your hand up. Okay, so we have it's moved by Councillor McLeod Haggett, seconded by Councillor Dietrich. Got a question? Go ahead, Councillor Oak.
Just to that point, though, the Deputy Mayor, do we have the budget in the community safety well-being budget to cover that?
Through the mayor, at this point, yes, we do. Yep.
Okay. Any other comments, questions at this time? It's moved and seconded. There's no further discussion. Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 5, I believe. Thank you. Moving along. Oh, Councillor Neve, thank you. And 14.5, please. Mr. Neve, you wanted that pulled?
Yep. Thank you, Mayor Finch. There's a request here from the Exeter BIA about closing Baldwin Street as a location.
Oh, this is another.
Oh,
You may have a different agenda there. It's the Sauble Bayfield Maitland Valley Source Protection Region.
my fault.
No problem. I was going to have that pulled anyways.
It's okay. I can talk about that too.
Sure. Okay, go ahead.
There's a letter here from the ABCA or Sauble Bayfield Maitland Valley Source Protection Region about the phase out of free well water testing and just the significant impact it would have on private well owners. And so I was wondering if we could support that recommendation.
So moved. And is there a seconder for that? Councillor Oak, any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you. And then 14.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries, no worries. 14.6, I believe you wanted that pulled too, Mr. Neeb?
Sure, I'm looking at the wrong agenda,
Okay.
so.
Well, I actually wanted that pulled anyway, so perhaps I can just turn to staff for a comment on it.
This resolution is asking about Blue Box producers, some support in the interim. So it would be if council would consider supporting this, staff
Is-
would be agreeable to that as well.
Is there a mover for that to support? Councillor Oak, is there a seconder? Councillor McLeod Haggett, any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Masua Carlson, recommendation, please.
That South Huron Council receive communication items not otherwise dealt with.
And a mover, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Dietrich. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Carries with 7. No closed session under 15, therefore no report from closed session under 16. 17.1, please.
That South Huron Council gives first, second, third, and final reading to bylaw 16/2024, being a bylaw to amend bylaw 69/2018 of the municipality of South Huron for lands described as part lot 10, concession 6, Stephen Ward, municipality of South Huron.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Vaughn, second by Deputy Mayor. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? That carries with 7. 18, please.
That South Huron Council gives first, second, third, and final reading to bylaw 17/2024, being a bylaw to confirm matters addressed at the March 4th, 2024 public and regular council meetings.
And a mover, please. Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Dietrich. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you. 19.
Adjourn at, sorry, that South Huron Council hereby adjourn at 7:38 PM to meet again on March 18th, 2024 at 6 PM or at the call of the chair.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Neeb. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor?